Hmm. Okay, so am I live? Am I live? Can I be heard well, or is it too soft? Can I be heard here? Let's apply a filter while all the cool people come on in. Okay, so so no, I think I'm too soft. So. Or is it just the volume on this thing? Is it my bad mic quality? Okay, I think I'm good. Okay, so tonight I'm going to be talking about a very specific topic, and this topic is going to be about the worship of God and polytheistic worship throughout the ancient world, and why it is not natural, right? Because the common paradigm that we have amongst secular scholars and more liberal Christian scholars is that people just kind of started worshiping multiple gods. They started through animism. They worshipped water. They attributed a spirit to water, or to the wind, or to a rock, or something. Something that makes absolutely no sense when you actually start once you actually start breaking it down. But they'll say that they started worshiping this and that, and then they brought on higher metaphysical concepts to it. Then they brought on complexity to their way of worship. They made it systematical. They made it ritualistic. And what we're going to be talking right now is from a biblical perspective, right? Not from we'll yeah, for sure using aids, secular aids, but from a biblical perspective, why this makes no sense, right? How can you say, oh, I believe that the Bible is literal and true, and then start saying stuff like, oh, well, it's all through, it's all polytheistic worship, bro. These people just more or less got God right, which which just makes the worship of God like a lottery ticket. Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't, and it's clearly not that. So we're gonna start off with how does this whole thing start, right? How does what's the context for polytheism in the world according to our biblical narrations, right? What is the context? What is the whole setting for it? What is the origin of this? How do we get it? And first off, we gotta look at Genesis. We gotta look at the earlier books of the Bible. In Genesis, we clearly see that Adam knows God. and Adam's direct descendants also know God. Uh, they choose to avoid him, right? Like how Cain does. Cain chooses to avoid him, avoid all responsibility that he has with God and with his brother. And he can't handle it. I don't want God to exist. Cain is like the first atheist. He's not a modern atheist for sure, but he's the first guy coping with his reality. He doesn't want to be. He really doesn't want to know God because he knows that entails responsibility. He really doesn't like it, but he has to because he's the third person on the planet, so he's obviously going to start knowing God. He's the third or the fourth. I forget the genealogies and such things, but Cain, in his act of defiance towards God and him choosing to stay away from God, becomes the first outright denier of God in the full sense. Because the Bible doesn't mention, oh, and then Cain repented after certain events. No, he just says, no, well, just give me my own land, just let me drift away from here. Just let me have my own place. And that's where we start seeing the problems through the descendants of Cain, where, as you can see, then the Bible lets us know that Adam and Eve do have another male son, which is Seth, and all the righteousness, right? That all the men of renown that are mentioned in the first chapters of Genesis, all the way to the flood account, are the descendants of Seth. They're not the descendants of Cain. We don't mind the descendants of Cain because they are not the righteous people, right? So we can assume right now without uh, more evidence, which will be provided, because it is mentioned actually in further books of the Bible. It gives us a bit more detail about how the time of Noah, the pre-Diluvian era, was going on, where we see that something is obviously very wrong with the human relationship towards God in the in the pre-flood era. And this is laid out very clearly in Genesis 6, where we get the account that God is very displeased towards his creation because his creation has forgotten him, right? His creation, the creation here being man, doesn't care about God anymore. We also got to keep in mind that at this time, prior to the whole scientific consensus that people are that they're different, that they've evolved, that we're shape shifting monkeys. Man here is of a different stature, right? We have the first people, coming off from the Edenic man, the almost direct descendants of Adam, right? From a couple of lines down. So Adam, him being originally unfallen, right? He wasn't fallen, then he becomes fallen. Obviously, looks different than us physically because this world, due to its fallen nature, is just constantly on the path to self-destruction. This world isn't going for the better. Uh, this world is actually going for the worse. We are on the path of crashing and burning. So Adam, obviously, he's not going to look like you and I with all our defects. He's gonna be looking a bit better, quote unquote, so to say. He's gonna be looking healthier. Giants are mentioned that are abiding in the spirit. Giants, so we can assume that Adam was taller than us. He could have been better looking, physically stronger, such and such, right? Um, so post pre-flood man has they are longer living. As we can see, the median age that we get here for human lifespan is somewhere between 800, 900 years, right? So humans are living more than 9 times what a normal man lives nowadays. 10 times, 11 times, depends. Humans are obviously living very long lives. they're called heroes, right? The Bible mentions them as men of renown. Uh, we get the term Nephilim, the great ones. It's known to us that man is quite different at this time. It's not exactly even the people at the time of Noah, at the time of Moses, which is when we get this revelation, the book of Genesis. No, something else is quite different with man and his appearance and his outwardly approach towards the world. Something's quite off, in the sense that man here is actually, a greater man. Sure, they're fallen. Sure, they're not in the Edenic state, but it is not us, right? It's not modern day man. Nowadays, you see us with so many defects. We get things like autism, Down syndrome, things that were more or less unheard of in the ancient world. We get pronounced cases of genetical aberrations, right? All these things that we call genetical diseases and such. And obviously, here, the account that we get is that pre flood man is not subject to these things. Pre flood man is not, dying of Down syndrome, they're not dying of AIDS, they're not dying of genetic aberrations because they are living, 900 years, 800 years. They are being they're as perfect as we can, imagine a fallen man to be. This is to say they are not perfect because only God is perfect, and they're not in theosis with God, so they can't share in His energies, and therefore strive uh, closer towards God. But in our materialistic, physical sense, they are perfect. As we can say, oh, that bodybuilder has perfect physique. We know that they're not actually perfect. We just attribute that word in our, lighthearted usage of words too. So, as I was saying, so pre-flood man obviously has something going on, and we can assume due to the biblical account that we get that man is not caring about God because man believes that by themselves they're pretty well off. They most likely had cities, they were living in groups, they were living very long lives, they were very well off materially. Spiritually, they were very dead. Spiritually, they were in great danger. And that actually comes to fruition, right? Their whole spiritual danger, the whole spiritual disease actually becomes very apparent when in the same chapter in Genesis 6, we get the proclamation from God that his spirit, the Holy Spirit is going to leave these people. The grace of God towards man is going to leave because God just can't stand these people who will not worship Him, who will not humble themselves before Him, who will not acknowledge Him. So we can assume that these people already had a, a pseudo atheistic, maybe uh, not totally atheistic, because this is not so far removed from the generation of Adam, from the time of Adam as we are. We can assume that these guys have something going on, right? It's not the worship of God, because clearly otherwise the flood wouldn't have happened. But they're not 100% atheistic. They still have these generations before them, and they have in parallel the generation of Seth. They have the descendants of Seth who are clearly righteous and pious men who know that God exists and that He is the sole creator of all things. So we can assume that they have a mixed system probably going on. They have something that is not the worship of God, and therefore God, He adds that to His grievances towards pre-flood man. God says, man's forgotten me, so I will forget man in the sense that I will not I will no longer push, my spirit upon him. I will no longer let his spirit I will no longer keep my spirit with them. Because God, in many times in the Bible, He says, "Oh, I have remembered you. I have remembered my covenant with you. I have remembered you in the specific instance." Not in the sense that God is forgetting people and something reminds Him, right? God doesn't do that. He is all knowing. he says that in the sense that whenever he remembers someone, he remembers them in a good sense. He remembers them, for good things, towards their salvation. That's why we say to God, these days and in the past, we say, "Oh God, please remember us, right? Please remember all the righteous deeds that we have done. Please don't let us die in uh, please don't forget us and let us die the second death, the second death being the spiritual death." That's why we proclaim these things. So God says, "Man has forgotten me, so he forgets man." And that's the divine forgetfulness that is not actually forgetfulness. It is the good tidings that God brings towards man whenever man is working in synergy with him, that is no longer present for these people, which triggers the whole flood event. It triggers out the wiping of mankind, so that God can get this soft restart upon man. He chooses the genealogy, the family tree of Seth and his descendants through Noah. And in Noah, we get Noah's sons who will become the fathers of all the nations. It's Japheth, Shem, and Ham, if I'm correct, plus their wives, which are not mentioned. So we get the descendants of Noah, who will eventually have the task of rebuilding the world. The sons of Noah were probably of the same vein and race of Noah, as to say that they were probably they are a bit removed, from the time of Adam, from that initial human appearance, but they're still long living. Noah has a lifespan of several hundred years, so obviously he's not faced with the genetic defects that we are faced nowadays. He doesn't have a 7 year lifespan. He has I think something closer to 600, 700 year lifespan. So obviously something is still quite different with these men at the beginning. And in fact, throughout the genealogies that we stated later on, we can even see that there was giants. There were still people who retained these genetical gigantic characteristics. Now, what does giant mean here? That is, for personal interpretation. If you choose to believe that giant here means 7 feet tall people, it means 7 feet tall people. If it means 8 to 10 feet tall people, that's what it means. Because we gotta assume that they're not playing by our rules, right? They're not playing by our genetic rules. They have way stronger genes. They have a whole different capability of uh, human appearance. They are mentioned to be more gigantic, the men of renown, right? Stronger, better looking, just in a materialistic sense, better than us. But like to restate again, quite spiritually dead. So what we later get is uh, this actually even happens during the last years of the life of Noah, is that all the descendants of the sons of Japheth, Shem, and Ham choose to pool themselves together. They choose to, the great majority of them choose to make themselves be known in one city. Again, already starting to forget God, which is quite curious because it actually, as we can see, it doesn't take much to forget God. It takes very few years, months, or days to start forgetting Him, even though these people have been literally saved from the greatest calamity ever known to man. These people are, the last what was it, 8 people left alive on the earth, and they immediately choose to start forgetting God again. So as we can see, their descendants, their almost direct descendants, was chose to pool themselves in Babel. It's been proclaimed that Babel is this site called Eridu in around the area that we call Samaria or Mesopotamia. Whether that is correct or not, again, that is left eventually for the dispensations of everyone. We're not basing our entire talk here on the fact that a certain scholar discovered this and he's linking it. No, we're not. Remember, this is from the biblical perspective. Which, if we don't know anymore, we don't know anymore. But it is mentioned in the Bible, right? We're using the Bible as a jumping point, not the modern, secular archaeological takes. So we get man pulling in here in Babel, trying to build this great edifice, right? Trying to build this great monument for the sake of themselves. So man here already immediately forgets God, and they start a vain pursuit, a vain work, a work full of vain glory, where they said, "Well, let us build something great. Let us make ourselves be known across the world, lest our whole memory is extinguished from the earth, lest we be scattered." Right? Almost prophetically. Let us make ourselves be known, because that's what we gotta do. It's all about us, right? The whole world revolves around us, us, us. So let us build something so great that even people from future generations will say, "Oh yeah, this was them." What happens with that? God, in His all-knowingness, immediately knows what's up and descends upon them and kills off their glory, their vainglory. He says, "No, that is not how we do things here. This is not about man trying to, become greater than God. This is about man trying to reconnect with God, and you guys are not doing that." Yeah. So, as we can see, the first post-flood people already have this atheistic mentality. Yeah, like I said, it's not atheism as we define it today with its whole philosophical implications. It's just this forgetting of God. It's this simple forgetting of God, not minding God, keeping Him in the background and us in the foreground. And what does God do? He immediately scatters them, right? He immediately confuses their tongues. Something that's quite curious is that we really can't pin language past a certain thousand years. And we'll get all sorts of bogus theories as why language is not the same, why there's no common denominator for language, why we'll get something like, oh, the whole tribe just randomly chose the same word for an apple, and everyone agreed on apple. And then everyone agreed on what gender of apple would be. And then everyone else agreed. It makes absolutely no sense. It just relies way too much on the consensus fallacy. So as we can clearly see, plus there are some very unique characteristics to language that just for the sake of time we will not touch here. But human language is obviously not something that is created by humans themselves originally, right? It's not made up by some farmers who, by some grugs, some cavemen who were going, "Oh, her, apple here." No, it is obviously something that is very much given to men by God. And God disperses this original language and fragments it to however many languages he chose to, right? We have lost thousands and thousands upon languages. And something that is even, supported. Remember, we're not, our linchpin isn't secular archaeology, so we don't worry if it's wrong, but something that we have seen is that at the very beginning of the Bronze Age, we get very various amounts of little communities that start conflict with each other. Why? Because they are segregated, because they don't speak the same language. They are starting to fragment themselves and not see themselves from the same culture. If you can't talk to someone, they're not going to be your equal. If I can't understand you and don't know what's going on, well, then you're just going to be left to yourself, right? I'm sorry, but that's just how it really is. If I don't understand people from China, so I don't really mind what the people in China are doing, because they're not, first of all, they're not my modern notion of countrymen, but they don't speak my language, so I can't even be well informed without the need of translation for their things, right? So that's another hurdle that I have to overcome. So I'm just going to leave them to their own devices. Same thing happens here, but on a more initial and closer scale. If I don't know what the neighboring tribe is doing, well, that's the neighboring tribe. And if one day I have a conflict with them, they're no longer my equal, they're just other people. And that is echoed in the archaeology where we see many fragmented towns, many segregated towns where you have one set of people, choosing to be in this corner of the town and the other people choosing to be in that corner. And they are more or less working together, but they don't really want to, mix too much because they are them, we are the red people, they are the blue people. And that is later on seen when we have the entire pillaging of towns in the archaeological record, where you have pretty much a set of people that are found dead in their homes. Their remains are found in a certain almost concentrated place, and then you have a next set of people who look a bit different, who are found in burials or they're also in their own separate place. So we start seeing this segregation of man right in his fallen state, which is why I can also make the case that no one, even today, with our whole modern notions of progress, no one is truly without, racism. Racism, even in its most lightest version, is something that everyone has, just due to the progress of the fall of man. It's very apparent in some cultures, it's very subtle in others. In urbanite lifestyles, it differs, etc. Right? That's not the specifics of this. So already we get from the people of past, almost the direct descendants of the sons of Noah. We already get this forgetfulness towards God even in Noah's lifetime. And how does this start? How does what happens? What happens? What is going on here? And we get this answer of why do these things happen almost spontaneously within the Bible itself, right? We don't have to go to another authority. Uh, if we come from an Orthodox background, which I do, we have the full access of the entirety of canon. Uh, some of the books they're called Deuterocanon. I personally do not like that term because it implies that it's something later added. It's something not from the start. It's something that was a bit hidden. Some people use apocrypha, which actually does mean hidden, and that carries lots of negative connotations for us. And because we are not hidden, but rather very open about who we are and what we do, I don't use that term, so I'll just use full canon, because everyone else does have butchered version of the canon. The greatest example is the Protestants. They'll be taking out books like There's No Tomorrow. Then we have Catholics who have taken out some. Then on the actual other almost extreme of that end, we have people like the Tewahedo Church, who will just tack on books like There's No Tomorrow. They'll find whatever Gnostic heretical teaching is there, and boom, that's the book. So first off, we're gonna go to Psalm. I'm sorry, we're gonna go to the Wisdom of Solomon. Wisdom of Solomon is this so-called deuterocanonical book, right? It's this book written by a Greek. I'm sorry, an Egyptian Jew. Well, Greece was the people at that time in Egypt. It's written by this Egyptian Jew who, he himself finds himself in a reality where Judaism, his people, the Jewish tribes, they're not the majority in this area of the world. So some will be swayed to paganism, some will be swayed to all these new hip philosophies brought on by the Greeks, right? Some will be swayed by the teachings of Pythagoras, and some will be swayed by whatever other Hellenistical uh, stuff they find. So this man here, this unspoken author, begins, almost a pseudo apologetical work, which is also, inspired. It is in our canon because it also contains prophecies of Christ. So something is very different with this man. And in Wisdom of Solomon, first in chapter 2, he refutes what we can see as obviously a very atheistical worldview, where he mentions that there are people who say that there's nothing beyond this life. He says that there are people who say that no one has returned from the dead, right? Obviously, no one has returned from the dead in its fullness because it is pre-resurrection, it's pre-resurrection of Christ. So yeah, that is a very true statement, but they omit the sense of life after death. They say that there's nothing, it's just me, I'm in this moment, and I will be gone. And they don't hold to the sense that there is something beyond this life, that there is a life to come. They don't believe in that. And he says that those men are foolish. He says that those men are foolish, so we can already see that there's atheistic, at least in our secular way of looking at it, that there's already atheism, 2,000 years ago at the very, very least. Could be way more. And it was way more, as we have seen in the Bible, where people, just choose to forget God out of the fall, out of pride, out of all these sinful aspects that man now has to deal with. So in Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 2, it is very much mentioned that the foolish men are the people who say that their life is short and painful, that no one has returned from Hades, that there is no return from death, that they must, entail themselves in hedonistic lifestyles because this is it. Very, very oddly enough, these people actually do take something like atheism to its most logical conclusion, right? Which is just, hey, if I'm only going to live 75 years, I might as well, be an African warlord and have a harem of women and indulge myself day and night in the most ubiquitous pleasures of life because, well, that's it. I'm only going to be here for that amount of time, and afterwards it's nothingness, right? So I might as well just be a warlord in Africa, warring day and night, uh, indulging myself in pleasure of the senses as much as I can. And then when I die, I will have died happy, according to my own subjective standards. I will have died happy. So he says that these people, they're actually very foolish and that their memory fades away from the earth very quickly, and that the inheritance that they leave, if they do leave inheritance, the inheritance obviously here means their children and how their children or place could perceive these people. They'll say that these people they can't bring anything good, right? Their children will be ungodly, they'll be lawless. Their children, their whole their descendants will not be remembered themselves. And we can clearly see that no one remembers who these people are, right? We know who the righteous men are. They are quietly, very much, and rightly so, venerated and exalted as, our righteous men, our men of right renown, because they're doing all their renown for the glory of God and not for vainglory. So it is mentioned that these people, they're very much dumb. They are stupid, that they let themselves be fooled that there is nothing after them, that there is, they are it, that these people are, just very much in the wrong, because there are, by this point, the almost the whole entirety of the Old Testament has happened. And by Old Testament, I mean the books. And these people have gone countless and countless and countless signs. The whole existence of the Jewish people is a sign from God. They are set out from God, right? It's not that one man one day said, "Oh, I'm a Jew now," which is actually the very, very dumb atheistical idea that the Jews came from a Canaanite tribe who one day chose to split off and they start acquiring some weird gods. And no, that doesn't make sense when we actually start boiling down to how Canaanite culture and how Judaic culture works. But uh, you know, secular scholars are they don't care for God, they don't know God. So why even try? As the Bible mentions, these men are very foolish, and their memory fades away from the world. They leave nothing to us because their teachings are nothing, right? They themselves choose to be nothing because they choose to be without God. So later on, we're gonna get the other problem of, wait a second. So how do we go from these people who forget God, and then we get to this whole polytheistic worldviews that very much plague the ancient world and are straight up mentioned in the also in Genesis. Um, in Genesis, and if not in Exodus, right? With the mention of Pharaoh and these people. And that is also tackled in the Wisdom of Solomon in chapter later on in chapter 14, where it is mentioned that this is almost, it almost even has this like scientific approach to it, where it is mentioned that a father has a child, right? A father very much loves the children under most circumstances. They're going to love their children, and they're going to do anything for them. And so a father will have a child, and when that child dies inevitably, let's say young, they die of a disease. That father is going to be very much grieved by the loss of his child. It's natural. We can't blame the father for that. His little kid, his whole, crudely said, his whole universe, right? Is Yeah, he's gonna die, and that kid's gonna die, and the father's gonna be very much grieved, and the father trying to make sense of this new circumstance that he has, that his kid is no longer with him, right? He's obviously going to try to make an image of his child so that he can have him, if at least in a very vague sense, with him. So the father, what is he going to do? He's going to maybe paint a picture of the child. He's going to try to carve out a little statue of the child, right? He's going to make a monument in remembrance of the child. And what starts off first as a memorial to remember him, just to comfort the father with the fact that he has inevitably lost his kid, to the effects of the fallen world, right? To disease, maybe war, maybe anything else, pretty much. He's gonna start conversing with this statue, right? Blow off some steam. He's gonna start conversing. He's gonna start having conversations with this inanimate object, and that's where really this whole idol making process actually starts, where he's going to start talking to the idol. He's going to start talking to the statue, to the monument, to the painting of his child. And one day it'll inevitably reach the point where it's almost as if his kid is there. And that's actually where we also draw to Psalm 95, Psalm 96, where it is mentioned that all the gods of different people, all the idols, are just demons. That's when a demon, starts directly influencing the father. That's when the demon actually gets inside the idol. Is that the father is going to start talking to this thing as it was his own son, and the thing is going to start making demands of the father, of the person who has erected up this monument in remembrance to the kid. So what they're gonna get is this immaterial object that is eventually gonna start acting as a person, as a human being, and they're gonna start demanding stuff. One of the first things that that the father could do is, hey, maybe in remembrance of when it was my kid's birthday, as a crude example. What if I start leaving some food? I know that the wooden statue is not going to eat it, but what if I left some food there as in remembrance to him? And then next he's gonna get the idea. Hey, what if I leave my kid very much liked clay birds. So what if I leave a clay bird to him, right? In remembrance of him. And that is very much what we see nowadays in many places, where in memorials you see people leaving up things for dead people. Not to say that they're idols, but that is very much step one in idol making. Now, it's not the same as veneration of, let's say, the relics of saints, because we know that they're not our personal gods, right? We know that they're not the creators of this world. We know that they're in a different context. They're in the Christian context, and we have ways of approaching these saints and the relics and all these things. But in the idol worldview, in this pre Christian or anti Christian rather, because the prophets of the Old Testament were all Christians, right? They all looked for their Redeemer, for the Messiah, for the one who's gonna end the fallen state of man and bring man back up the to God. So so in this anti-Christian, in this world of idolatry, these people are gonna start eventually offering things to the idol, where after time, people see the idol. They're passed on this culture, this whole idea of, hey, maybe if you give things to the statue. I've kind of noticed that last time I gave to the remembrance of my kid. I gave him a meal. I gave him a bowl of soup and a salad, and a good thing happened. So maybe we should start doing that more. And that's where step two of the idol making process comes, where people will start noticing that if they give things to an idol, which actually did happen. It's not this whole also modern secular worldview where idols don't have anything, right? It's just an empty one statue. No, obviously these idols, these paintings, these statues, and the worship that is attributed to them, they do have some effect, as negative and as little it could be, but they do have an effect. They are a vending machines. Once we sacrifice X, Y, and Z, we'll eventually get something. Doesn't matter how detrimental to us it can be. Doesn't matter that if we don't give something to the idol, something bad will happen to us. We're getting something, right? So they're pretty much starting to enslave themselves towards the idol. They're starting to give it things to see if it'll give things back, or to vouch, to save vouch themselves that the idol doesn't start doing things, because then they'll go to the opposite of their view and they'll say, wait a minute, this statue, it's given us some things in the past. What if when we stop doing it, it'll be mad at us? Well, what if when we stop giving it sandwiches every Thursday, what if it is displeased with us, and since it's given us good, it can give us bad? Most people say, oh, that's ridiculous. How can people think of that? But then we get modern day cults. We get modern day cults. We get our whole view on celebrities who we call idols, right? Where, oh, if I stop doing this for this for this person, for this thing, something is gonna happen to me. Uh, we don't see it in a straightforward manner, but that's what eventually happens. So you have these people who are trying to give people to give an object things. That's where the demon comes in, possesses that, and actively influences the mind of the idol giver. And that is when we, after a while, we reach phase three of the idol, where the whole memory of the kid, of the passed away person, has faded from the earth, and stories and the mythology have surrounded this person, and now it's 100% the demon there. It's the demon is just residing there. They attribute a name to this identity. You can call it a Moloch. You can call it a Quetzalcoatl. They can call it whatever they want, right? They can call it Anki, but they'll start seeing that um, it has its own identity, right? That's when they start forming, through the influence of the idol, they start forming the activities. They'll start forming the rituals that they need to do, the lore that surrounds them. And also another parallel that we get in the book of Wisdom of Solomon, that's not the only way to approach idols, is that people, and that's where we can actually see this whole concept of the God King, the God Emperor arise, is that people, in order to pay respect to their king, in order to venerate their king or something along the lines of that, they build up a statue of their king, and they could probably pull in all their taxes around that statue. Maybe someone was there keeping guard of it. These people wanted to see their king, and if their king came, the king would be greatly pleased with them. Or these people could know who their ruler was, who actually was their whose lordship they were under, all these things, and eventually, due to the whole nature of communication systems in the ancient world, it wasn't instantaneous. So over time, there be again this corruption of what role the king played. And statues aren't normally demolished overnight. So people would just keep this king in mind, and they'll eventually say, hey, so what's happened to the king? How long have they been around? Do we still have to give them things? Do we, whatever? And well, people just shrug and they'll keep doing it. And then they'll get a new king, and then someone will come and tell them of the exploits of this king, and they'll say, wow, this king conquered all of this land almost by himself. And then so again they'll start building up a mythology around a person, and that person inevitably becomes an idol, right? They inevitably become a demonic god. A very curious example of this is the Titan, the Greek Titan, creator of humanity, is a figure called Iapetus. What does Iapetus sound like to anyone? And that's Japheth, right? Japheth is the son, is the he's the son of Noah who creates our modern day notion of at least a great majority of Indo-European peoples. One among them is the Greeks, and Japheth, he's mentioned in Greek mythology as Japetus, which is a very obvious and almost straightforward uh, descent of the figure of Japheth among these people, is that they start building up this whole lore around him where he eventually becomes the creator of mankind, or at least the forerunner of mankind. And as you can see, the memory of Japheth has been corrupted to the point where he is no longer Japheth, the father of the people of this certain group, but now he's this demonic entity who has some weight as a deity in the lives of humans. So that's a very simple, that's a very clear example of how it happens and when it happens. And and yeah, um, so that's for how polytheism forms and how it's not natural, because even in the later parts of the Bible, and by later I mean a couple of years after Genesis, well, we get mentions. Well, people will not straight up just mention their demonic gods, right? They will not mention, oh yeah, the only real gods are X, Y, and Z. The only real gods are these gods that we all worship in the idol. In some instances of Genesis, Exodus, we get mentions of people who are obviously not from the Abrahamic line who know that God, capital G, God, exists. They will mention him, they will worship him, they will acknowledge him as a god, not just uh, as a consensus, or these people, oh yeah, your god exists because I respect it. No, that didn't exist in the ancient world. They will mention God as an existent deity, but then they'll just tack him on with whatever other demonic gods are worshiping. And the greatest example of that school of thought is Pharaoh in Exodus, who is willing at one point to worship God, but just as one among the many that he has. So it's not that he does it as a, oh, if yeah, all deities are made up, so what's it to me if I make another one? No, he acknowledges that the God of Abraham, right, the Father, the Triune God exists, that he is a real, actual acting deity, right? He sees all the miracles that he can achieve, but he'll just make it one among the many that he has. He won't give exclusivity to him, which is what God demands, right? God later says this in Exodus, where he says, I am a jealous God. Not in the sense that he has a passion and the passion is jealousy, but that he is a God who demands soul worship from his creation because he is the creator. Zeus is not the creator, right? Hermes is not the creator. Anki is not the creator. Thoth is not the creator. God is the creator. So, in a very logical way, he just says, "Hey, I made you. You are mine. Therefore, you must worship me in a very crude way," and that's the crudest way to put it, right? Which makes all sense. People who are higher than others demand respect, and for God, it's no longer respect, but it's entire worship, right? It's entire devotion of our lives to the one who has created us, because we live, we only live because of Him, right? Because without God, without the goodness of God, there can be no creation, so we wouldn't even be here to talk about this. But so that's something that we see with Pharaoh as the greatest example is that there are people who know that God clearly very much exists. That the God of Adam, the God of Noah, all these people exist. He knows, these people know that God exists, but he's just one among the many now. He's just this other figure. We're going to include him in our whole pantheon of gods. And what is the other examples that we get of the existence of God outside of the Abrahamic line? Is someone like Melchizedek. Melchizedek is mentioned as being a priest of God. He's not mentioned as a pagan priest who also worships God. No, he is mentioned as a priest of God. How could that happen? Because Melchizedek knows that God exists, and through a pact with God, right, through his worship with God, is a priest. He sacrifices to God. He worships God. Not as God is one among the many gods that he has. No, God is his sole deity, and he does that because he knows that God exists. He's not a polytheist, right? He's not in this secular mindset where polytheism is all that we have really, because animism and the water spirit then gave rise to the deer spirit, and gave rise to the animal spirit. No, he knows through historical events, right, that God exists. He knows that there is one sole God, and Melchizedek is the priest of God. And one can say, oh well, what if Melchizedek was just a guy who worshipped God? He was more or less right in how he worshipped him. He was more or less wrong. But how do we know that that Melchizedek is actually worshiping God? How? Because um, every time we ask for a blessing, our blessings can only come from the top to the bottom, right? We can't bless priests, right? We're not, at least we're not supposed to say, and we actually can't say to a priest, hey, God bless you. Why? Because the priest is a higher authority than us, right? The priest, being a priest of God, and participating in the liturgy in the most straightforward manner than a person can, right? Well, because he is the one who is, working throughout the liturgy for the sacraments, in the sacrament of what eventually culminates in the Eucharist. Uh, the priest, asks, we ask for the blessing of the priest, and if, let's say, an archimandrite is there, then we ask for the blessing of the archimandrite. And if the bishop is there, then we ask for the blessing of the bishop. And if the patriarch is there, then we get the blessing of the patriarch. And all these authorities do the same, right? So Abraham, who is one who blesses, right? Abraham blesses. He asks for the blessing of Melchizedek. What does that show us? That Melchizedek, in a way that we don't know, is higher in this spiritual authority, right? This he's in his hierarchy as a priest of God. He is higher than Abraham, and therefore Abraham asks for his blessing. Melchizedek doesn't say to Abraham, "Oh, please bless me." Abraham says to Melchizedek, "Oh, please bless me." And Melchizedek does, and that's why Melchizedek, he is the type of the new priesthood. That also shows us that Melchizedek is not this person who is doing these things by himself. So Melchizedek is the type of the new priesthood. He's a new type of the priesthood, and we also get an example of this through Jethro. Jethro is also like Melchizedek, where he's not from the Abrahamic line, at least the line of the Hebrews, but he is also in the sense he's a priest. He's not one who is a priest of 10 different gods, and one of them is God. No, no, he is a sole priest of God. Why? Because he also has a pact with God through his own worship. He just in the Bible, it's just pretty much he sprang out of nowhere and he's worshiping God, right? Because he knows that God exists. People still knew it around this time that God existed. This is also, how Abraham knows that God exists. Abraham's not this. He's not a polytheist who knows that there is like a greater God, but there's these lesser gods. No, Abraham also knows that God exists. People knew that God existed. It's just that some were already choosing, the idol, the demon gods, through the various methods that we've already said that demon gods are formed. So that's how we know that people throughout the entirety of the Old Testament at the beginning knew that God existed. It's not that people were like, as soon as the flood happens, oh, everyone's cut off from God and everyone's left to his own devices, and oh, everyone is, doing whatever and the same and all these things. No, people do know that there is a God, God the Father, not gods, not demonic entities that will almost be, human beings with powers. No, no, they know that there is a Creator who is not on the level of fallen humanity, but rather way up, right? He's not even in the same game. And the greatest example that we have of this are the examples that I mentioned, where uh, people will acknowledge God, people know that God exists, people are priests outside of the whole Levitical ordination by God. Um, the creation of idols, how we get demon idols, how something that is supposed to be a memorial will get corrupted into worship of the the matter itself, and that's how all these entities come to be, and that's how we can know that for sure God is existent in the ancient world. It's not, oh, we have to come up with 100 deities now. Oh, we have to come up with a whole system of worship now. No, it's a direct corruption of the knowledge of God, which is, like I said, echoed throughout Genesis, Exodus. As soon as time starts passing, people will forget God and they will be left with their demon idols, which is what happens to people like the Canaanites, right? With Baal, Moloch, all these highly demonic entities. These people don't know God anymore. So much time has progressed that they don't know God anymore. But people early on did, and that's also how we get, someone like Abraham. Abraham is not this, at least in the beginning, this singled out man. He eventually, through his worship of God, enters a pact with him. He becomes the father of the nations. He becomes the father of the Hebrew people, and he also becomes our spiritual father in the sense that he is the one who actually starts. He's the one who more or less kickstarts this whole the plan of God towards his incarnation by the creation of the Jewish people, and then through the events of Exodus and the entire New Testament to culminate of the Old Testament to culminate in the New Testament, right, with the incarnation of the Word of God itself, Himself. So that has been it on how we know like God was a known deity in the ancient world, and how corruptions of Him are what led to all of polytheism, what led to this, the fallen state of man. To further elaborate on the fallen state of man and his worship to, demon entities to matter, because matter doesn't save, only God saves. So that has been it. Thank you all for joining the stream, and I hope you'll have a good one.